I have with me a guest today that you are going to love to meet. He's a veteran, he's a cop, he's an activist, he's an author, and he's everywhere, and he has just some fascinating stories to tell. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Betsy. I appreciate it. Thanks to your organization for all your education of the public, and to you, because I see you all over the place on Fox News especially.
Well, thank you so much. So you started, before you were a cop, you were in the military, right? Talk about that for a minute.
Yes, I grew up in Brooklyn, and at 17, after the public schools, I was fortunate to get into the Air Force Academy. So I headed out to Colorado, graduated, and then I did 5 years active duty with tours in Italy and Saudi Arabia. And when my active duty was done, I wasn't really happy with my career field. I wanted something a little more active. I got out to come home and get into federal law enforcement. I applied with all the alphabet agencies and switched over to the Army National Guard. And it took a couple of years. I went for FBI, Secret Service, DEA. So in that time of it taking so long, I went to my local NYPD precinct in Brooklyn and took the test. So I ended up getting on first in NYPD, was there for 6 months, and then Suffolk County PD called 6 months later. And when Suffolk calls, you answer. So I moved out to Suffolk, and I've been there ever since, 22 years now. And during my 22 years in Suffolk, I then transferred over to the Army Reserves, which pre 9/11 really was not a lot going on. But as I'm sure you know, post 9/11, we were very busy. I was in for the invasion of Iraq in 2003 with a civil affairs special operations unit. And then in 2010, I went to Afghanistan as part of the provincial reconstruction team. Then after that, I did some missions in NATO as an instructor, and finally retired in 2019. And now just strictly doing police and being a PBA board member.
So explain to people who may not understand, how are you in the military and still a sworn peace officer? And I mean, in the military getting deployed. Explain to people how that works.
Well, it's being a citizen soldier. Your profession, your business, it's typically easier if it's with a public municipality government. They have to let you go by law and keep your position for when you come back. And New York was great with it, and Suffolk County was especially great to all our cops that are serving. Our positions were held for us, and if some people were going to make less money overseas, they paid them the difference. So top-notch treatment of our military here in Suffolk County. And it was the same thing from what I understood in NYPD. They have so many members in the military. But our reserves, there's a significant portion that are in firefighters, police, medical, because those professions are needed in combat zones, and when you're doing standing up countries or trying to rebuild countries, or standing up governments trying to rebuild them. And that's a substantial part of doing civic military operations like we were doing. So there was actually a lot of us.
So how does your military experience translate to street police work, and vice versa? Talk about that.
I'm going to say, actually, in this case, it was my police experience and training that translated into my military experience. Because when I went to Iraq, I was previously Air Force Finance. I then switched to Army, and I got 2 whole weeks of training at Fort Bragg. And like, oh, okay, you passed all the physicals. You're a special operations CA soldier. Like, oh, great. Thankfully, I had 2 different police academies and time on the street and growing up in Brooklyn, you kind of get street smarts. So all those together with my age being a little older, I think that helped significantly going into Iraq, dealing with local leaders, dealing with people that trying to kill you, or those in those villages where they're harboring those people. You just know how to deal in a second to flip things on and off. When you had to be alert, when you could kind of let your guard down, just awareness of your environment and and the people you were encountering.
Yeah, a lot of American law enforcement is literally urban warfare sometimes, isn't it?
Right, right. And that's really what Iraq was like, because they really have an infrastructure and a government and buildings. Whereas in Afghanistan, it was definitely more like medieval times. They literally still have dirt roads with the sewage just going down the middle of the dirt, which is in the center of the village, with wells that they're getting their water from. They didn't have a central government. It was all provincial and tribal. So it was quite different experiences.
So what uh motivated you to write a book? And it's a fantastic book. I mean, the reviews are off the charts.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
What talk about the book? What motivated you to write it, and how did you come up with the title?
Okay, it was 2019. So picture this. This is pre-COVID, pre-George Floyd. November, December, I have to do my final capstone project to write a master's thesis to get my master's degree in national security studies. So I'm thinking, with all my military experience, living overseas, I'd really like to write about the resurging Russia or the emerging China, who's our greatest threat, or EMP taking down the grid, or biological warfare. But I thought, you know what, having experienced America, post, let's say, Obama, Michael Brown, I thought, you know what, really, the greatest thing that has a chance of dividing our country and destroying us from within is the issue of racism, and using the police as that focal point, that institution, which they're trying to say is systemically and historically racist. It's not that China's going to come overrun us, in the country, or the same thing with Russia. It's going to be from within. That's really our weak point, because of our history, which everybody knows and nobody tries to deny, as we shouldn't. And I thought, got past that to the point, especially, like, they keep on bringing up how the police were slave catchers. Well, you're talking about today, you have departments that are majority Black, like I believe Atlanta PD, or majority minority in NYPD. So it's time to move on with the times. And so what I did was I wanted to see. And I was actually curious, because I know how it is here in Suffolk and growing up in New York, but when all you see on the media is bad stuff about the police interactions, deadly force being with Black people, I was wondering, how often does this really happen around the country? What are the numbers and the stories? So I did a multifaceted scientific research paper. So it's not my personal feelings. What I started out with, I took USA Today, because that had the largest national distribution of any paper in America. And I analyzed the front page for 4 full years. I literally looked at every single front page online, and I saw what are the front pages, the stories and the teasers that are then linked in further in the paper, looking at deadly police shootings, any stories on those. And then I also looked at Black on Black crime, because they also say that, oh, the media just tries to make it look like there's more Black on Black crime than there really is. It's not a big deal. You're just doing it because you're racist. And then I wanted to see, well, comparatively, how many stories are there about police being killed in the line of duty? And just for fun, how many positive police stories will there be? So that was just the first part. What I found in those 4 years, using the Washington Post database, because that's who the left uses to try to attack us, how many deadly police shootings were there in those 4 years? There is 3,880. And out of that, about 1,886 were of white people, 948 were of Black. So right there, you can see it's 2-to-1, whites killed versus Blacks, and significantly more quantitatively white. So, like, how many stories do you think USA Today is going to have? What I found, they ran 82 different stories mentioning 57 Black subjects, a total of 132 times, while mentioning one white subject one time in the story. There was about 2 Black subjects being shot. Now, you think of how they call us racist, because the disparity is we don't have deadly shootings of Blacks in line with their percentage of the population. It's 26% are killed versus 13%. Well, here you have 13% of the population is Black, but 100% of the stories are about Black people being killed by the police.
So those numbers are just extraordinary.
Yes.
And this is the thing. This is why the National Police Association exists, because we saw this war on cops,
Yes.
really starting in 2014 during the Obama administration.
Right.
And we said, boy, somebody's got to counter this. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do. Same thing you're trying to do,
Excellent.
is to fight that false narrative that
Yes.
somehow American law enforcement is the problem. Now, here you are, you put all this research in, you gathered all this data, and I'm assuming that all of that scientifically researched data was wildly embraced by the academic community, right, Mike?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Don't you see me on all the shows? CNN, CSNBC, MSNBC, whatever. No. In fact, it's really hard to get the book out there, which is ironic because they're so easy to call us racist. Like nothing, no big deal. The cops are racist, systemically racist. But when you actually show them facts, put them out there and say, look, no, we're not racist. And by the way, you rioted for a whole summer, destroyed, it was like, I don't know, 1,500 businesses, caused $2 billion in damage. 47 people were killed and 2,000 cops were injured on the basis of you're angry that the police are systemically racist. And here I'm showing you we're not. It's a great thing. It's something you should celebrate.
Right.
But that would put some people out of business.
Well, and that's the thing. And when you look at, so now, we entered the George Floyd era, if you will.
Right.
And you look at that, and you look at the homicide rate in this country, and you look at the young Black men who have been victims of homicide in the last 2 years since the death of George Floyd. How many thousand young Black men have died by homicide?
Yes.
Because, and this is the thing, to avenge George Floyd,
Right.
we have now a criminal justice system that we have bail reform, we have de-incarceration, we have de-policing, we have defund the police, all to avenge one guy's death. And every officer involved in that situation is now in prison. And yet you put out the reality of those of the statistics that show that no, our system isn't systemically racist.
No.
Law enforcement is not systemically racist. So
Exactly.
you get that published, and how does this start to affect your work life in a post George Floyd situation?
Well, as I was writing the book, after I wrote my thesis, and then as I'm writing the book, our county had a police reform task force, as every county was mandated to do in New York by then Governor Cuomo, in reaction to the George Floyd incident. So at that, I watched the first couple. They did one per precinct. And after watching them just attack the cops that I've worked with for years and have served honorably and professionally and do not discriminate, I had enough. And so I started writing speeches because everybody was given 3 minutes. Now, what I saw was initially a couple of people that were pro-police, they spoke and they were destroyed online. They were doxxed, they were attacked. So nobody else wanted to. So that was it. There was no more pro-police people speaking. So I started giving a speech at each one and walking people through all the truth, specific stories, statistics, my own stories. And I got a transfer that fell through because of that. And it just comes with the territory. That's how things work. Well,
and let me ask you this, because a lot of people, in fact, a lot of police leaders, quote unquote leaders, they'll step back from speaking out because they want to maintain their jobs. They want to have no issues with being doxxed or their family being harassed or themselves being harassed online. And and you took a completely opposite position on that. Talk about that. How did you make that decision?
It really wasn't even a decision to make for me. It's just natural. I spent my whole life serving my country, fighting for it overseas, for the freedoms that everybody enjoys. Now, I understand when you're in uniform, there's certain things you can and can't say, but when I'm off duty on my own time and I'm not doing anything to dishonor my department, when in fact I'm doing the opposite, I'm trying to honor my department and my fellow officers and educate the public on the great things that we do and how you're being fed lies. There's no question to me of, what's going to happen to me. It's not something that I worry about. And I do look forward to the day I am retired and I could speak like one of your recent guests, Lieutenant Special Assignment Eric Dim. Him and John Macari just had me on their show. Awesome guys, and they are retired and unfiltered because they're retired. God bless them.
It's a great podcast.
Yes, it is. It is.
Well, so, we do polling, other organizations do polling, and we find out that most of the American public wants their police officers to be well funded. They trust us. We're one of the most trusted professions in this country.
Right.
They worry about us. They're concerned with our safety. They were upset about all the violent riots of 2020 and 2021 and wanted them investigated. And yet, what you found out in the media is absolutely just the opposite. Why do you think that the media and a lot of politicians want people to have this hatred for American law enforcement?
Well, first you got to think about what kind of people are attracted to politics. And you start to see, like we have George Santos, who recently got elected in New York, habitual liar. He's no different than Joe Biden, who's been lying his entire career. Nor like the senator in Connecticut who had false valor and tried to make believe he was a Vietnam veteran. These are people that are just doing what they need to do to get in power and stay in power, not necessarily out of duty, honor, country. And I think some people do have an agenda that they are not happy with America and they would like to see big changes. As you see, we have elected officials that are socialist, not hiding it. They brag about it. So there is an agenda to destroy America the way it is. And they're doing it by attacking our culture, because without a culture, you don't have a country. So they're attacking our police. They're attacking just common sense and words when you see what they're doing with children, even with science. Where, look, I was one of the biggest vaccine takers ever being in the military. I've got 10 things of anthrax in me. We would get the flu shot every day. But after seeing how they politicize COVID, I'm not so believing in science anymore, or, science. So there's an attack on all fronts within America. And as I found in the book, the systemic racism being exhibited was not by the police, it was by the press, the politicians, and the protesters, all in unison.
Right, absolutely. And we have now what's been happening in Atlanta, Georgia, and it's starting to spread around the country, right, is once again, Antifa is getting involved in the anti-cop movement, and they're getting violent. Where do you see all that heading?
Well, not in good places, because in reaction to the violence, the police are going to have to use more force. And then it becomes like a round circle where the more the police act, the more they get reactions from these groups and then sympathetic politicians and media. Because I know you had this one guy who was on, I think, CNN or MSNBC saying, well, they're calling this violence, but is it really violent because they're just destroying property? Well, first of all, tell that to the people whose property it is. And the whole incident was precipitated by violence. They shot a Georgia State trooper as they were clearing out their illegal compound in the forest. So yeah, it's violence. And the way they mince words, they gave him, recently, we had 2 cops stabbed in Suffolk County just this last month. And when Stony Brook, the hospital, took phenomenal care of them, they were updating the public on their status. And one of the university professors then writes, oh, but what about the person they murdered? And you're like, murdered? They were literally stabbed and almost killed because they didn't use deadly force first. They tried to de-escalate, then were almost killed, and then used deadly force to, save their own lives and not die.
So we have about a minute and a half left. What do you think it's going to take in a minute to bring young people back to this profession that you and I and 750,000 other people in this country love?
It's going to take an all-out effort starting from when children are very young, giving them an appreciation and respect for law enforcement, having us shown in a positive light in the schools. It does all start in the schools and how they're being raised by their families, and then what they see on TV, that it's positive. They shouldn't be scared of us. You don't want any children to be scared of you, because then when they grow up, that could lead to a bad encounter because they've been taught to fear you, so they're going to be combative or something. And there's been a lot of bad stuff found in the schools that activist teachers are using to push their agenda, their anti-police agenda. I know there's many teachers that are against it, but you have to get rid of the ones that are doing it. And once you get that, right?
Yeah, I mean, why is it that activist teacher good, activist cop bad? That doesn't seem to make much sense, does it, Mike?
No, it doesn't. There's definitely different sets of rules for different professions and people.
Right.
Yeah.
Mike Simonelli, where can people find you? Where can they find the book? You are somebody that I think people are really going to want to follow.
Thank you very much. They can find me at Twitter, is at Justified Force. I have a website. It's jdfinformation.com, JDF for Justified Deadly Force. And on Truth Social, it's at Justified Deadly Force.
I cannot thank you enough for spending time with us today. And if you would like more information about the National Police Association, visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Ma'am, put the gun down! Put the gun down!
Last year, law enforcement officers were involved in hundreds of thousands of use of force incidents. A use of force incident is when an officer must use nonverbal tactics to gain control of a dangerous situation.
Put the knife on the ground.
In many cases, officers have no choice but to use force when a suspect doesn't comply with a lawful order.
Use of force is always ugly. No one likes it, especially police officers.
Together, we can help de-escalate these dangerous encounters. Help police officers by complying with their lawful orders. Don't attack, attempt to disarm, or flee from an officer.
Use of force is an officer's last option. Most incidents can be avoided by not resisting arrest.
If you feel you've been wrongfully detained by a police officer, then seek a legal solution after the encounter has been resolved.
Let's keep everyone safe. Comply now and complain later.